1. Introduction. RAWSEP View. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable. Wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP View. Purple air. PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Webisode 57DHXZE November 7, 2025 Trump bullying meant to kill a measure to slash ship pollution. In Webisode 57DHXZE 1 Trump officials accused of bullying tactics to kill a climate measure. 2 Marjorie Taylor Greene knows exactly what she's doing. 3 None of this is good for Republicans gerrymandering efforts look different after Election Day. 4 Airlines cancel flights. To meet FAA demands US airlines canceled hundreds of flights to meet Federal Aviation Administration guidelines meant to ease pressure on air traffic controllers during the government shutdown. RAWSEP View By their votes, even Republicans and independents showed that they blame the Trump Republicans for the government shutdown and will blame the Trump Republicans for the airport delays. If Trump Republicans knew how to run a government responsive to voter needs, they would be providing continuing health care, help to American voters. 5 California Jimmy Kimmel opens Big Beautiful Food Bank as SNAP cuts hit families amid shutdown. 6 Brazil COP30 Scientists criticize straw man arguments in Bill Gates' climate memo. Tech billionaire relying on false binary with call to focus less on emissions and more on aid for poor. Experts say. 7 United Kingdom, the Labour government of Britain faces up to tough economic choices. Finally, economists say. 8 United Kingdom economic policy is one thing. Right-wing reform. UK head Nigel Farage cannot crib from the Trump playbook. 9 Switzerland, the Trump tariffs leave Swiss farmers with too much milk. 10 Germany Chipmakers scramble. 9 Ukraine music to mourn Ukraine in World War II returns with fresh urgency. Headlines. Main content. 1 Trump officials accused of bullying tactics to kill a climate measure. Nations were poised to approve the first fee on pollution from ships. That is when the Trump administration began the threats. Among other threats from U.S. officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio personally called officials in several countries to threaten financial penalties and other punishment if they continued to support the ship pollution agreement. RAWSEP View. When coming up with a reason for killing a pollution regulation measure that would slow global warming and slow the adverse health effects of particulate pollution, the Trump rationale was that without air pollution regulation, businesses would prosper. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against would smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times November 6, 2025 More than 100 nations were poised last month to approve a historic deal to slash pollution from cargo ships. That is when the United States launched a pressure campaign that officials around the world have called extraordinary even by the standards of the combativeness of the Trump administration. According to 9 diplomats on its receiving end, an ambassador from Asia was told that if he voted in favor of the plan, the sailors of his country would no longer be allowed to disembark at American ports. Caribbean diplomats were told that they could be blacklisted from entering the United States. These and other threats, including tariff sanctions and the revocation of U.S. visas of diplomats, effectively killed the deal. According to the 9 American, European, and developing nation diplomats directly involved in the negotiations, the White House, the State Department, and the Energy Department acknowledged derailing the deal and repeated their opposition to international efforts to address climate change. They said the shipping fee would have hurt the American economy. They said the U.S. worked with Saudi Arabia to defeat the shipping fee and that helped other nations that had reservations about the agreement to vote against it. But foreign diplomats said they were stunned by what they described as nasty and very personal threats made by State Department officials, which were mostly aimed at leaders from poorer or small countries that are economically dependent on the United States. Some of the delegations were summoned to the U.S. Embassy in London for these discussions. Most countries had been ready to vote for the plan, which would have imposed a fee on heavily polluting vessels to push the industry to clean up. It was negotiated over several years by the International Maritime Organization, a United Nations agency that oversees shipping policy, but the Trump administration was able to block the vote, the 9 diplomats said, after numerous countries backed away. In the face of the threats from the American senator, Sheldon White House Democrat of Rhode Island was briefed on the events by negotiators who were directly involved. White House called the strategy of the Trump administration a shock and off-thuggery approach. Details of the Trump actions come as world leaders meet in Belém, Brazil for 3 weeks of United Nations climate negotiations. For the first time in 30 years, the United States is not sending high-level representatives to the annual UN climate talks and may not dispatch any technical staff either. Trump is withdrawing the U.S. from the 2015 Paris Agreement, the global pact among countries to rein in climate change. He has called global warming the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world and said that the science was developed by stupid people after blocking the shipping agreement. Secretary of State Marco Rubio praised the Trump coalition building efforts. Rubio also issued a warning should this initiative or any other similar one emerge from the UN bureaucracy. Again, our coalition against it will be ready and larger. 2 Marjorie Taylor Greene knows exactly what she is doing. The Jewish space lasers lady may be positioning herself to lead the MAGA movement. RAWSEP View. Having no subscription to The Atlantic and no access to this entire article, this except leaves the answers to the unquiet enigma of Marjorie Taylor Greene unanswered. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Atlantic November 5, 2025 Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has been bucking the Republican Party line with increasing frequency, standing with Democrats to demand that the Justice Department release the Epstein files, decrying the spike in healthcare premiums, and holding love-ins with the hosts of The View. Many people are trying to get their heads around the fact that the Jewish space lasers lady is now a leading voice of heterodoxy and at least intermittently common sense. The prevailing theory for this bout of independence is that Greene is angry at Trump for foiling her plans to run for Senate. Here is some tea for you, explained Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a longtime Greene antagonist, on social media. This week, the White House and Trump land shut down the Marjorie Taylor Greene personal ambitions to run for Senate, and she has been on a revenge tour ever since. The journalist Tara Palmieri suggested in her newsletter, as much as I would like to believe the Greene recent critiques are born of sudden enlightenment, that it was just fearing that her adult sons will have to pay higher Obamacare premiums that changed her mind on healthcare, or that she is suddenly opposed to mass deportations. The simpler Messier truth is often personal. From the January-February 2023 issue, why is Marjorie Taylor Greene like this? Having initially judged Greene to be a wildly uninformed conspiracy theorist, I was similarly predisposed to dismiss her evolution as a kind of revenge for being slighted, but having listened closely to her commentary of late, I have concluded that she is up to something more interesting and strategic. 3. None of this is good for Republicans' gerrymandering efforts look different after Election Day. RAWSEP View things are looking up for Democrats. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Atlantic, November 5, 2025, a yes on 50. Sign hangs over a freeway in California as cars drive below sign up for the Trump return, a newsletter featuring coverage of the second Trump presidency. The Trump gerrymandering war has never looked riskier for his party. Prodded by Trump, Republicans earlier this year launched an audacious plan to entrench their congressional majority by redrawing House district maps to squeeze out Democrats. Anywhere and everywhere they could. The gambit was an exercise in political power and coming outside of the traditional decennial redistricting process without precedent in modern history. Yet if Democrats feared not long ago that they would be locked out of a House majority, their decisive victories across the country last night have made them arguably the favorites heading into the 2026 midterm elections. In California, an overwhelming majority voted to redistrict, essentially canceling out the 5 House seats that Republicans had thought they gained through redistricting. In Texas over the summer, the GOP steep losses farther east cast even more doubt on the wisdom of its redistricting push. Voters repudiated Republicans virtually across the board, handing Democrats convincing victories for the governorships of New Jersey and Virginia, important judicial and legislative races in Pennsylvania, and for the first time in 2 decades a pair of statewide elections in Georgia and Virginia. The breadth of the win of Democrats gave them their largest majority in the state House of Delegates since 1989. For Airlines Cancel Flights to Meet FAA Demands US, airlines canceled hundreds of flights to meet Federal Aviation Administration guidelines meant to ease pressure on air traffic controllers during the government shutdown. RAWSEP View by their votes, even Republicans and independents showed that they blamed the Trump Republicans for the government shutdown and will blame the Trump Republicans for the airport delays. If Trump Republicans knew how to run a government responsive to voter needs, they would be providing continuing healthcare help to American voters. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization, The New York Times, November 6, 2025. Here is a look at the 40 airports listed, the 30 highest traffic airports in major metro areas. The FAA has been steadily tracking controller absences at the busy hubs that make up its so-called Core 30 list, occasionally broadcasting that data as they did on Halloween when the agency noted that half were experiencing staffing triggers. Those airports now slated for cuts are Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Boston Logan International Airport, Baltimore Washington International Airport, Charlotte Douglas International Airport, Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, Denver International Airport, Dallas Fort Worth International Airport, Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport, Newark Liberty International Airport, Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, Daniel K. Inouye International Airport, in Honolulu, Washington Dulles International Airport, George Bush Intercontinental Airport, in Houston John F. Kennedy International Airport, in New York Harry Reid International Airport, in Las Vegas Los Angeles International Airport, LaGuardia Airport, in New York Orlando International Airport, Chicago Midway Airport, Memphis International Airport, Miami International Airport, Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport, Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Philadelphia International Airport, Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, San Diego International Airport, Seattle Tacoma International Airport, San Francisco International Airport, Salt Lake City International Airport, Tampa International Airport. Midsize commercial airports, cargo hubs, and private jet fields. A smaller number of mid-size airports that see significant commercial traffic, cargo hubs, and airfields popular with private jet operators are also slated for cuts. Those include Anchorage International Airport, Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport, Dallas Love Field William P. Hobby Airport, in Houston Indianapolis International Airport, Louisville International Airport, Oakland International Airport, Ontario International Airport, in California Portland International Airport, Teterboro Airport, in New Jersey. End of list as travelers waited in suspense on Thursday to learn whether their flights would be among those canceled starting Friday morning. The government agencies behind the mandatory cuts to air traffic spent most of the day in silence. This is a political move by the Trump administration to try to force Democrats to accede to their budget and priorities, which cut health care and nutritional benefits. Representative Steve Cohen of Tennessee, the top Democrat on the House subcommittee overseeing federal aviation, said in a statement Thursday the announcement said the cuts would roll out gradually, affecting only 4% of air traffic at the affected airports on Friday and building to 10% by November 14th. The airports that will be affected by flight reductions are shown on this map, with just hours before the Friday morning rush. Airlines appeared relatively untroubled by the looming cuts, which experts said would likely amount to only minor disruptions for most major carriers, but to administration critics that only reinforced the idea that the radical changes administration officials had announced on Wednesday were mostly for show. New Yorkers bracing for canceled flights and hectic airports will have the latest GOP shutdown stunt to blame. Sean Butler, a spokesman for Gov. Kathy Hochul of New York, said in a statement next week air traffic controllers, some of whom have taken on supplementary jobs to make ends meet, are bracing for a second missed payday. Last Friday, the national airspace came close to chaos when 35 facilities experienced significant controller absences known as staffing triggers, creating long delays at many of the major airports in America. But the new restrictions were announced at the end of a week that had been remarkably functional, with the FAA posting only a handful of notices about staffing triggers. Staffing-related delays have begun to tick up again. An FAA advisory from Thursday evening noted that 17 air traffic facilities were experiencing staffing triggers, with related average delays of over an hour at Boston Logan International Airport, Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Newark Liberty International Airport, and Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Allies of the Trump administration insisted Thursday that the national airspace was on the brink of disaster, blaming Democrats for playing a potentially deadly game by refusing to back the GOP pitch to fund the government without any preconditions. The National Air Traffic Controllers Association has insisted that its members workers are showing up to work despite the added stress of working without remuneration through the shutdown and remain committed to keeping the skies safe. 5 California Jimmy Kimmel opens Big Beautiful Food Bank as Snap cuts hit families amid shutdown the late night. Host invites food and essential donations at his Hollywood Center to support Los Angeles charities. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian. November 5, 2025. The late night TV show Jimmy Kimmel Live is stepping up to help during the ongoing U.S. federal government shutdown by opening a new center for food donations. The ABC program announced the program, titled The Jimmy Kimmel Live Big Beautiful Food Bank, on Instagram on Tuesday, just after Trump reaffirmed his plan to block SNAP benefits despite the earlier order of a federal judge for the administration to use emergency funds to continue the food assistance program. Cutting SNAP benefits creates uncertainty for American children, seniors, and families. The Post said, to support our community members in need, we are starting a donation center in our Hollywood backlit to benefit the LA Food Bank and St. Joseph Center. If you are in LA, please come by to donate food. And if you are not, please consider supporting your local food banks. The message also noted that specific donations such as crackers, trail mix, fruit snacks, 100% juice boxes, dried fruit cereal boxes, wipes, diapers, facial cleanser, deodorant, soap, lotions, oral hygiene items, and feminine products would be appreciated. Before the Kimmel announcement, Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that SNAP benefits would be given only when the radical left Democrats open up government, and that the benefits were haphazardly handed to anyone for the asking as opposed to just those in need, which is the purpose of SNAP. Kimmel, known for his outspoken criticism of the Trump administration, also recently took aim at the Trump Great Gatsby-themed Halloween celebration. Throwing a party at your private golf club where the theme is rich white people hours before millions of Americans are set to lose their food assistance might be the most Trump move of all time. Kimmel said Monday night it felt like the last big bash before the Epstein files come out. Meanwhile, the Kimmel popularity has soared and reportedly surpassed the Trump following a dispute with the administration that led to his show being briefly taken off the air in September. According to a recent survey, the Kimmel suspension was announced on September 17th after he criticized the Trump administration handling of the killing of the right-wing political activist Charlie Kirk the previous week. Brendan Carr, Federal Communications Commission chair and a Trump ally, allegedly threatened to revoke licenses of ABC affiliates unless the network acted against Kimmel. The decision sparked protests, debates about free speech, and boycotts targeting Disney, the ABC parent company. The network reinstated Kimmel 6 days later, with many industry peers crediting the reversal to those who had joined the boycott. 6 Brazil COP30 scientists criticized straw man arguments in Bill Gates' climate memo. Tech billionaire relying on false binary with call to focus less on emissions and more on aid for poor, experts say. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. November 6, 2025. A new memo on the climate crisis from Bill Gates relies on straw man arguments about the threat to humanity and false dichotomies between spending on climate or aid for the poor. Some climate scientists say. Published last week, the 17-page missive of the tech billionaire called for a strategic pivot away from focusing on slashing emissions and towards preventing poverty and suffering. It was quickly picked up by some on the right, including Trump, who hailed it as a much-needed backpedaling on climate efforts. We just won the war on the climate change hoax. Bill Gates has finally admitted that he was completely wrong on the issue. Trump posted on Truth Social. Gates said in an interview with Axios on Monday evening that the Trump post was a gigantic misreading of the memo and that he was increasing his funding to climate and health, but he added that with climate aid to the global poor countries often choose between the two issue areas, this is a numeric game in a world with very finite resources. Gates said, but funding for emissions reduction need not come at the expense of aid to eradicate hunger or poverty, said Zeke Housefather, a research scientist at Berkeley. Earth, where I think I disagree with Gates fundamentally, is this idea that by taking money away from climate we would suddenly have a lot more money for these other programs. We do not necessarily live in a zero-sum world. How Bill Gates is playing both sides of the climate crisis. In his memo, Gates wrote that global warming will not lead to the demise of humanity. This misunderstands warnings of climate scientists, said Catherine Hayhoe, chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy. I have not seen a single scientific paper that ever posited that the human race would become extinct. It is a straw man the way he is proposing it, she said. He is speaking about it as if scientists are saying that, and we are not. What we are saying is that suffering increases with each 1/10 of a degree of warming. The memo from a very influential person who controls a lot of money hinges on an inarguably a false binary between a world where everything is fine and literally the end of the world, said a climate scientist at the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. In reality, a lot of bad things that can happen in between. He said climate policies have helped the world avert worst-case climate scenarios, but the track the world is on now would still yield massive amounts of human suffering. The Gates memo is disconnected from the way the world works. For instance, it posits that when the world warms, some outdoor work will need to pause during the hottest hours of the day, and governments will have to invest in cooling centers and better early warning systems for extreme heat and weather events. Though everyone deserves air conditioning, the reality is that many parts of the world do not have it. The Tuesday conversation about the memo came just days before the start of the COP30 Global Climate Summit in Brazil. The talks will present an opportunity to truly take on the climate crisis, said Hayhoe. We have to be talking about phasing out fossil fuels, she said. RAWSEP interjects that we also have to phase out and eliminate entirely indoor residential wood burning and industrial wood burning. Wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 and CO2 as the fossil fuel coal burning. 7 United Kingdom, the Labour government of Britain faces up to tough economic choices, finally, economists say. The New York Times. Britain faces up to tough economic choices, finally, economists say. The New York Times. November 6, 2025. The central bank held interest rates steady on Thursday, a decision that came at a time when British policymakers and lawmakers are confronting economic challenges. For the Britain policymakers, a moment of reckoning seems to have Arrived this month, lawmakers, central bankers, and the fiscal watchdog of the country are all confronting the challenges of an economy that is growing but is also weighed down by high inflation, high debt levels, and low productivity. This quandary will feel familiar to policymakers in other countries, including France, where debt levels are high and the government and public are not aligned on how to tackle it, but for Britain, a history of sluggish productivity, growth, unsatisfactory living standards, and weak investment have come to a head. Economists are pushing policymakers to make choices which could be deeply unpopular that they hope will make the finances of the country more sustainable and create the foundations for faster economic growth. The costs of not acting now are quite high, said an economist at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. The British Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, has said, "It is time to make tough choices." The Labour Party, just 3 weeks before she will announce her second annual budget. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, gave an unexpected speech on Tuesday, in which she warned that she would be taking decisions in the national interest, not for political expediency. "When I was appointed Chancellor, people put their faith in me to take our country forward, not to be swayed by political convenience, not to always do what is popular, but to do what is right," she said. In the budget, Ms. Reeves is expected to either increase taxes or cut spending in order to find tens of billions of pounds if she is to stick to her chosen rules on lowering debt. But the Chancellor recently presented her spending plans, so raising taxes seemed to be only one way out of this bind. Ms. Reeves did not say in her speech that taxes were going to increase, but analysts have said she appears to be preparing the waters for an unpopular decision. The Labour Party promised before it was elected into government last year that it would not raise taxes on working people. Breaking that pledge is likely to infuriate many voters and provide ammunition to her political opponents. Economists at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research and the Resolution Foundation, another think tank, are among those recommending Ms. Reeves raise income tax. The Chancellor has sought to transform the stagnant economy of Britain without having much money to do so. She has spent more on the national health service and increased public sector wages, a splurge that has helped the economy of Britain grow. It is set to be the second fastest growing economy in the group of 7 this year after the United States, but the measures paid for by raising taxes on certain groups, including businesses, farmers, and wealthy foreign residents, have not been enough to supercharge growth or cover other spending needs such as on welfare and higher borrowing costs. Ms. Reeves is expected to return to the public at the end of the month to ask them for more. The Office for Budget Responsibility of Britain, an independent watchdog, is expected to lower its productivity forecast. The Bank of England on Thursday. The Bank of England made its own tough choice. Policymakers held interest rates steady at 4%, breaking their recent pattern of quarterly rate cuts amid concerns over stubbornly high inflation. Prices rose 3.8% in September from a year earlier, nearly double the target of the central bank. For much of this year, the 9-person rate-setting committee has been deeply divided on how best to manage an economy where price pressures are uncomfortably high, but the labor market has been showing signs of weakness, with the unemployment rate creeping upward. But caution won this week, with 5 members voting to hold rates. A spending surge by the British government has bolstered the economy. Britain, which is projected to be the second fastest growing economy of the G7 this year after the United States. The Office for Budget Responsibility. Part of the reason Ms. Reeves has to find so much more money is the expectation that the Office for Budget Responsibility, which provides independent analyses of the economy, is going to lower its forecast for the productivity growth of Britain from 1% a year. That would suggest the overall economy would grow more slowly as well, and the debt burden of Britain would be harder to bring down. The economists at the Office for Budget Responsibility, who influence fiscal policy, are accepting that the future might look less rosy. Ms. Reeves could avoid raising income or other large taxes and try again for a more targeted approach focused, for example, on inheritance taxes or capital gains taxes, but that could backfire and risk the credibility of the government in the eyes of financial markets. UK public finances are not on a sustainable footing, and there needs to be some credible fiscal consolidation. 5 years on from the pandemic, now is the time to start thinking about bringing that debt ratio down. 8. United Kingdom economic policy is one thing. Right-wing reform. UK head Nigel Farage cannot crib from the Trump playbook. Raphael Bear, The Guardian, November 5, 2025. Nigel Farage outlines the reform UK economic priorities at a press conference in the City of London, November 3, 2025. An opinion on Nigel Farage economic policy is one thing Nigel Farage cannot crib from the Trump playbook. Raphael Bear, the mega model based on the exorbitant market privileges of the US cannot be imported to Britain. That is going to be a problem for reform UK. Nigel Farage loves a gamble. In his 2015 memoir, The Purple Revolution, a whole chapter is dedicated to the Farage appetite for risk, how he indulged it in the city, and how that prepared him for a career in politics. He boasts of the time he lost a 7-figure sum of money in the course of a morning on the zinc market. Before breezing off to the pub, he waxes nostalgic about the halcyon days of freewheeling finance before ghastly regulators spoiled the fun, when terrible cock-ups could be written off because decimal points and all those zeros can be tricky after a 3-hour lunch. Farage, the commodities trader, was not a details guy. Farage, the politician, is not famously punctilious either, but the stakes are higher. He is backing himself to be prime minister, and it is not going to happen if voters see him as the kind of gambler who might blow the nation's budget on a boozy bet. Dispelling that notion was the purpose of a speech by the Reform UK leader on Monday. Farage disposed of the Reform UK 2024 election manifesto and its promise of tax cuts worth £90 billion because it was a tissue of fiscal fantasy. He observed that the sluggish growth and high debt of Britain demand sober management of public finances. He hinted that Treasury savings could one day be made by unpicking the sacred triple lock that guarantees perpetual real terms rises in. The state pensionless trust was not named, but the new parsimonious Farage economics has been formulated to silence comparisons between the Reform UK agenda and the budget misadventure of the Tory Prime Minister Liz Truss, whose unfunded tax giveaway incinerated the financial credibility of the nation. It is the Nigel Farage chameleon show, flashy, ever-changing pledges, but only one real policy. Xenophobia. By dabbling in macroeconomics, Farage also wants to show that he has range. He Can also complain about the Bank of England too cautious over cryptocurrencies, the Financial Conduct Authority captured by diversity agenda, public sector pensions a massive liability, and net zero a burden on energy bills. Europe cannot be the scapegoat it once was, but the old moan can be tuned anew to a post-Brexit. Key Farage is saying that the opportunity of deregulation from Brussels red tape has been squandered. Killjoy regulators tame the animal spirits of the market. The remedy is to slash disability benefits and use tax breaks to entice those non-domiciles who have exiled themselves back from Dubai. The fiscal details of how that might all add up, the decimal points and zeros remain shrouded in post-prandial haze. The White House claims the budget will repair itself with money generated by newly stimulated growth. That is also what Liz Truss said. The bond market was not convinced. Trump also thinks tariffs imposed on other countries will be a substitute for domestic tax revenue. He is wrong both conceptually and arithmetically. Tariffs are an import tax paid ultimately by U.S. consumers, not foreigners, and the Treasury income hardly dents the deficit. But for now, the absurdity of it just hangs in the air, defying economic gravity. That trick is not available to a UK Prime Minister, nor is the Trump habit of shaking down U.S. corporate giants for equity and cash. If reform so much as flirted with Trump economics in an election manifesto, markets would convulse at every opinion poll putting it in the lead. Labor would correctly warn that a vote for reform is a vote to bankrupt Britain. Farage is a gambler, not a fool. He knows he has to moderate his tone and get across some budget details, but attention to detail has never been his thing, and responsibility bores him. Maybe he can win without it. He might fancy the odds on Labor continuing to flounder, the Tories failing to get their act together, and that combination being enough to put him in Downing Street. And yet it is revealing how vulnerable the reform leader obviously feels on the economy. His old script is stale, and without the mega playbook to crib from, he really has nothing new to say, and a long time to be exposed not saying it. 9. Switzerland. The Trump tariffs leave Swiss farmers with too much milk. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, November 7, 2025. Facing the Trump tariffs, Swiss farmers find themselves with too much milk. The dairy farmers of Switzerland produced a bumper harvest of milk, but higher U.S. duties have forced them to consider ways to cut back, including slaughtering cows after feeding in the Alps all summer. Cows are escorted back to their farms to produce high-quality milk that is used to make cheeses like Gruyere, Emmentaler, Tilsiter, and Appenzeller. Gruyere makers are trying to make the most of a glum situation with the price of gold near record highs in Switzerland, a global hub for gold bars. The industry has started a U.S. marketing campaign to play off the higher prices we are seeing. Gruyere is the new gold of Switzerland, said Pierre-Ivan Guillot, president of the Gruyere Interprofessional Association. The hope is that American consumers will be willing to shell out for the luxury of real Gruyere rather than copies made elsewhere. After slashing exports in August, producers sent more Gruyere to the United States in September ahead of the Christmas season. As for Swiss cows, the farmers keep working toward a solution. We will try to do the least amount of slaughter possible, he said. Then when we have passed the difficult period, Switzerland can bounce back. The verdant hills of Switzerland have helped produce a bountiful milk harvest this year. 10. Germany. How trade tensions sent automakers scrambling for chips. Car makers and their suppliers are piecing together new supply chains after a Chinese-owned company in the Netherlands was caught in the middle of the trade war, revealing European vulnerabilities. The Mercedes-Benz headquarters in Stuttgart, Germany. Mercedes, Stellantis, and Nissan have formed task forces to keep production running and secure alternative chip supplies. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, November 5, 2025. Automakers around the world and their suppliers have begun scaling back production after a dispute over a Chinese-owned chipmaker in the Netherlands led to a shortage of the semiconductors needed to power the systems in vehicles. Representatives from China and the European Union met on Tuesday in an effort to resolve the standoff. More than a month after the Dutch government seized control of the chipmaker Nexperia, Beijing has halted deliveries of chips from its factories and criticized officials in the Netherlands for failing to work to find a resolution. Efforts from Washington to try to resolve the dispute have failed, leaving more companies concerned they may be forced to halt production if a solution is not found soon. The car industry in Europe has been the most vocal, but Nexperia makes thousands of chips used by other industries to make products like washing machines, vacuum cleaners, night vision devices, radars, and tanks. I think there are very justified concerns about global manufacturing output being impacted if this cannot be resolved in the next few weeks, said Chris Miller, author of the book Chip War, who reports widely on the semiconductor industry. How did the chip dispute start? Nexperia, which has headquarters in the Netherlands, was bought by a Chinese company, Winji Tech, in December 2019 and has since shipped basic but necessary chips to manufacturers around the world. In late September, the Dutch government took control of the company over what it said were concerns that more production could be moved to China from Europe. Documents from a court in Amsterdam showed that U.S. officials had pressured the Dutch government about the ownership of the company. Beijing responded by stopping export of the chips that are packaged at the Nexperia factories. They're sending automakers around the globe scrambling to secure supplies and warning about disruptions. The White House announced on Saturday that as part of the trade deal between Trump and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, shipments from the Nexperia production sites in China would begin again. That has yet to happen. Some industry insiders have drawn parallels of the current situation to the shortages after economies around the world shut down during the coronavirus pandemic, while others have pointed to a significant difference. This is a politically induced situation, the chief executive of Mercedes-Benz said on a call with analysts last week. Why cannot the chips just be replaced? Semiconductors require a two-step production process. In the Nexperia case, the front-end production takes place in Hamburg, Germany, while the back-end production, where the chips are completed and packaged, is done mostly in China. To produce the chips in China, Winji Tech would have to find wafers that were made locally, while Nexperia would need more options to finish the production outside China. The company already has some back-end production in Malaysia and the Philippines, but it is not Enough to compensate for the loss of its Chinese sites. Nexperia has the financial stability to make this happen, but it would take at least 4 to 6 months, said a senior analyst at the Mercator Institute for China Studies in Berlin. On top of that, the chips have to be tested and receive certification before they can be used in cars. In recent years, analysts have warned that companies moving production to China should have a backup plan, even if it means higher operating costs to strengthen and diversify supply chains in case of an emergency. This should be the latest wake-up call that anyone needs in terms of how far China is willing to go to protect its own companies. Which car makers are affected? The necessity of the Nexperia chips is reflected in the span of automakers announcing plans to curtail production. Mercedes, Stellantis, and Nissan have set up task forces to help them figure out how to maintain production while securing chips from other sources. Bosch, the largest auto parts supplier in Europe, said the situation with Nexperia had presented major challenges that demanded flexibility. The company said that up to 1,000 of its employees at 2 factories in Germany might have to scale back to part-time work through a government-supported program that was also used during the pandemic. We are using alternative sources of supply, optimizing inventory levels in our global manufacturing network, and implementing technical alternatives, said a spokeswoman for Bosch. Nissan said on Wednesday that it would cut production at 2 plants in Japan because of the suspension of shipments from Nexperia. 11 Ukraine music to mourn Ukraine in World War II returns with fresh urgency. The Thomas de Hartmann violin concerto was long neglected, but is now being championed by Joshua Bell. While Ukraine is once again under attack, Joshua Bell, wearing all black, is seen playing a violin on stage with other musicians sitting behind him. Joshua Bell will perform the Thomas de Hartmann violin concerto this week with the New York Philharmonic under the conductor Dalia Stasevska. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, November 5, 2025. In 1943, the Ukrainian-born composer Thomas de Hartmann wrote a violin concerto that seemed to contain the heartbreak of an exile over the destruction of his homeland in World War II. He dedicated it to Albert Bloch, a Jewish violinist living and hiding in the south of France. Hartmann had fled Russia with his wife Olga years earlier as part of the inner circle surrounding the mystic George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. In 1929, the de Hartmanns took refuge in an abandoned house near Paris that fortuitously had a piano. There, the composer began to find his own voice again in the violin concerto. He poured both anguish and vitality into a score that would be performed in 1947 and then forgotten, packed away like a suitcase of a refugee, heavy with memories of an unrecoverable past, until decades later it was found by the star violinist Joshua Bell. Already poignant, the concerto took on even more meaning in the Bell and Stasevska recording because of the circumstances under which it was made. The project could not be done in Lviv, Ukraine, where the orchestra is based, with the frequent air raid alarms that have sent people running for shelter. Instead, the INSO Lviv Orchestra traveled to Warsaw for the recording, which required special government permission for the male players to leave Ukraine during wartime. It was very meaningful for the musicians, Stasevska said. After hundreds of years of oppression, Ukrainians are now going through the very difficult de-imperialization of their minds and history. They are discovering who they are, what their culture is, and what the music is that has been forbidden, destroyed, or not published, she added. So, in a way, we are all together on this journey. Headlines: The New York Times. November 7, 2025. World pollution reduction stymied. Trump officials accused of bullying tactics to kill a climate measure. The New York Times. California fire victims urge state to hold insurers accountable. The New York Times. California, San Francisco. Republicans retire Pelosi as a villain and turn to Mamdani. The New York Times. California, San Francisco sees Nancy Pelosi as a tireless leader for the city. The New York Times. California, San Francisco, who will replace Nancy Pelosi as U.S. House representative in Congress. The New York Times. Elon Musk wins $1 trillion Tesla pay package. The New York Times. New York City. Mamdani wants to tax the rich. Can he persuade state leaders? The New York Times. New York Republican Stefanik to launch campaign to challenge Democratic Governor Hochul in New York. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Key questions from conservative U.S. Supreme Court justices in the tariffs case. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Trump team now claims its trillions in tariff revenue are incidental. The New York Times. Washington, D.C. Trump Justice Department is said to be investigating Democratic D.C. mayor over foreign trip. The New York Times. Mexico women's sexual assault of the president of Mexico exposes challenges of her equality. Push. The New York Times. Switzerland. The Trump tariffs leave Swiss farmers with too much milk. The New York Times. Kazakhstan is joining the Abraham Accords. Trump says. The New York Times. China exports unexpectedly falter as prices keep falling. The New York Times. Headlines: The New York Times. November 6, 2025. U.S. elections. November 4, 2025. Opinion: Trump is always teaching us about the Constitution. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4, 2025. 2 signs that Democrats flip Trump supporters on Tuesday. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4, 2025. A fight over maps. The New York Times. Air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and industrial wood burning and fossil fuel burning is ignored by Trump government. The U.S. is skipping the 2025 climate summit. For many, that is okay. The New York Times. California challenging Trump. Pelosi made history. The New York Times. California former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will retire from Congress. The New York Times. Consumers food recipes. Cranberry lemon bars recipe with video. Consumers showerheads. Delta 5 setting showerhead 52535 review. Surprisingly luxurious reviews by Wirecutter. Medicine and science. A grave condition caused by C-sections is on the rise. The New York Times. Medicine and science. The worst test in medicine is driving the high C-section rate of America. The New York Times. New York City explosion in the Bronx injures 7 firefighters. The New York Times. New York fugitive who faked abduction is found 13 years later enrolled in New York college. The New York Times. New York City. Mamdani allies create a nonprofit to push his affordability agenda. The New York Times. Philanthropy for science. Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan restructure their philanthropy. The New York Times. RAWSEP View. In good news, Zuckerberg is going to spend more for philanthropies supporting science. RFK Jr. RAWSEP View. Trump and RFK Jr. lack of understanding of science and medicine. Trump selects his favorite drug to favor with a program bearing his name, follow the money, and find out who profits literally, and who pays around the same amount for the drug literally. From the article headline, Trump announces deal to drop obesity drug prices to as little as $149 a month. The New York Times. RFK Jr. RAWSEP View. Trump and RFK Jr. lack of understanding of science and medicine. Trump selects his favorite drug to favor with a program bearing his name, follow the money, and find out who profits literally, and who pays around the same amount for the drug literally. From the article headline, what the Trump new drug pricing deal means for people with obesity. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. Judge orders Trump administration to fully fund SNAP benefits this month. The New York Times. Canada. RFK Jr. RAWSEP View. Canada has the misfortune to be bordered by the United States in 2025. Trump and RFK Jr. lack of understanding of science and medicine, follow the money, and find out who profits literally from quack cures rather than from scientifically recommended vaccines for measles, namely the unqualified by any experience non-practicing MD and Trump Surgeon General nominee Casey means. From the article headline, Canada is about to lose its status as having eliminated measles. The New York Times. Trump Republicans. The Nick Fuentes rise puts MAGA movement in a time of choosing. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. What a rough day in court means for the Trump tariffs. The New York Times. Venezuela. Trump Republicans block measure to bar military strike on Venezuela. The New York Times. Venezuela. U.S. sends attack aircraft to El Salvador amid regional troop buildup. The New York Times. United Kingdom. Britain faces up to tough economic choices, finally, economists say. The New York Times. Britain faces up to tough economic choices, finally, economists say. In Russia, bookstores offer a shrinking refuge as censorship tightens. The New York Times. Restrictions on publishers and sellers have grown more severe. Volumes are being pulled from shelves or redacted like secret documents, but bookstores remain important sources of community literature. Has always played an outsized, often uneasy role in Russian public life, alternately hailed and suppressed by those in power. In Russia, bookstores offer a shrinking refuge as censorship tightens. Restrictions on publishers and sellers have grown more severe. Volumes are being pulled from shelves or redacted like secret documents, but bookstores remain important sources of community literature. Has always played an outsized, often uneasy role in Russian public life, alternately hailed and suppressed by those in power. Reporting from the many bookstores of St. Petersburg, Russia. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. November 5, 2025. A bookstore in central St. Petersburg, once a tiny Soviet relic, grew into one of the St. Petersburg cultural landmarks. In just a few years, it expanded to 12 times its former size, adding 2 coffee shops, a souvenir department, and a publishing program. The store Podpisnaya Izdania also developed a distinct identity and cachet as a refuge of ideas in an increasingly tightly controlled Russia. Its tote bags emblazoned with witty slogans let its fans recognize one another around the world. The store was even featured in the 2023 book 150 Bookstores You Need to Visit Before You Die. The whole city is a fan of this place. It is tangible proof that my generation not only lived in this city, but also created something. But that very success has become a problem since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The Kremlin has repeatedly curtailed liberties in the arts and in speech that had been taken for granted this year. Especially the government turned its sights on books, a multi-story bookstore and cafe seen at night from outside through floor to ceiling windows. In just a few years, Podpisnaya Izdania in St. Petersburg grew from a tiny Soviet-era bookstore into one of the cultural landmarks of the city. Podpisnaya Izdania developed a distinct identity and cachet as a refuge of ideas in an increasingly tightly controlled Russia. In May, law enforcement officials arrested 3 staff members of Popcorn Books and Individuum, 2 progressive publishing houses, charging them with extremism for books about the LGBTQ movement. In July, a court fined Falinster, a popular bookstore in Moscow, and investigators have sifted through the shelves of others around the country. Podpisnaya Izdania was fined in May for selling 3 books, Against Interpretation and On Women by Susan Sontag and Everybody by Olivia Lang. Although the titles were not banned, they contained traces of propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations. Russian investigators said literature has always played an outsized, often uneasy role in Russian public life, alternately hailed and suppressed by those in power. In the Soviet Union, only books explicitly approved by the state could be obtained legally. The possession of any others was dangerous. People passed banned books among friends, sometimes to read over a single night. Today, determined readers in Russia can get any books they want in coffee shops. People are openly reading Summer in a Pioneer Tie, a lyrical novel about 2 male teenagers discovering their sexuality in a summer camp. The book became a sensation, selling more than 250,000 copies before the government effectively banned it and declared the authors foreign agents. But people continue to find ways to buy it online. A woman stands leaning against the exterior of a building with a cited site in a window next to her that says Books in Russian. We live in a special city, said a woman. Founder of Everyone is Free, one of the first independent bookstores in the city. Some publishers and bookstore owners said the Soviet system would be simpler. Preliminary censorship would mean rules of the game are clear. Right now, we are all playing Minesweeper when you do not understand what is forbidden and what is not. Russia close to its biggest capture of a Ukrainian city since 2023. Pokrovsk. The New York Times. China global exports continue to grow despite Trump tariffs. The New York Times. Headlines. The New York Times. November 7th, 2025. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. After the Mamdani mayoral win, Schumer rejects claims he is out of touch. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. Democrats dig in on shutdown after election wins. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. Democrats in Mississippi break the GOP state house supermajority. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. Elections show the Trump edge on the economy slipping. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. An emboldened Mamdani sheds conciliatory tone. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. For Zoran Mamdani, winning is one thing, governing will be quite another. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. 4 progressive mayors offer advice to Zoran Mamdani. The New York Times. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025. House race In Houston heads for runoff between young Democrats. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. How the world sees Mamdani icon threat proof of the American dream. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Jacob Fry wins third term as Minneapolis mayor. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Jared Golden Key House Democrat will not run again. In Maine, the New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Late night celebrates a consequential election day. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Live updates. Trump says government shutdown to blame for Democratic election victories. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Mamdani begins to pick the team that will help him run New York City. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Mamdani Spamberger and more candidates notch historic firsts on election night. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Mamdani won South Florida, expects a real estate bump. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Maps see the New York neighborhoods that swept Mamdani to victory. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Mikey Sherrill, the New Jersey next governor, says she has a mandate to lead the New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Opinion rock star, glamour and centrist pragmatism. Democrats had it all. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Opinion 6 ways Zoran Mamdani can improve New York City. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Opinion Trump is an albatross. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Opinion do dumb ideas ever die? The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Redistricting battles set off by Trump have few parallels in U.S. history. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Trump allies Republicans point fingers after election losses, but not at Trump. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Republicans reprise unfounded claims of widespread election interference. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. California Republicans swiftly file lawsuit in bid to block the California new House maps. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Trump allies right-wing media warns of socialism and chaos after Mamdani victory. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. A state-by-state guide to the gerrymandering fight for Congress. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Trump allies Trump versus Mamdani. Trump sees a capable foil in the New York next mayor. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. California, 2 Republican incumbents will face off as red turf shrinks in California. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. What does Zoran Mamdani want to do as NYC mayor? These are his top 5 priorities. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Why the Bronx swung toward Mamdani in the general election. The New York Times U.S. elections November 4, 2025. Zoran Mamdani wins NYC mayoral election and vows to stand up to Trump. Live updates. The New York Times consumers food recipes. Cream cheese pound cake recipe. Consumers food recipes. Quick turkey chili recipe. Consumers jewelry. The Florentine diamond resurfaces after 100 years in hiding. The New York Times consumers luggage. The 6 best carry-on luggage of 2025 reviews by Wirecutter. Consumers luggage. You can stop stressing about your oversized carry-on reviews by Wirecutter. Consumers suits. The meaning of Zoran the Mamdani millennial coded suit. The New York Times influencer. Internet when the life of a child becomes the family business. The New York Times Kentucky aviation after deadly plane crash at UPS hub in Louisville. Some deliveries may be delayed. The New York Times Kentucky UPS jet lost an engine just before takeoff in Louisville. Official said. The New York Times Medicine and Science. Can melatonin cause heart failure? What to know about claims of health risks. The New York Times Medicine and Science. Heavy drinkers develop strokes. Earlier study shows the New York Times Medicine and Science radiation may be unnecessary for many breast cancer patients. The New York Times Medicine and Science. To ease sciatica. Keep moving. The New York Times. Musk. Would Elon Musk work harder for $1 trillion than $1 billion? The New York Times. New York crime. 15-year-old is fatally stabbed at Long Island house party. Police say. The New York Times. New York City crime. He has been charged with dozens of crimes. Nobody knows his name. The New York Times. A man in a hooded sweatshirt and baseball cap peers at the camera in a courtroom. The criminal career of the defendant began in 1992 under the name Elvis Teller. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. November 5, 2025. For 2 years Carl Avinger had forged signatures and filed fake deeds to steal homes in some of the wealthiest parts of Queens. The scheme eventually fell apart. As such schemes do, investigators at the Queens District Attorney Office discovered it and charged Avinger and 3 accomplices on March 18th. With theft and fraud, the case, it seemed, was destined to trundle through the courts like thousands of other real estate crimes in New York City. Then came a phone call from Tennessee. Avinger, the caller told prosecutors on March 27th, was not Avinger at all. In fact, the caller said that he was the real Carl Avinger, and the accused man, whom the caller knew only as Ace, had stolen his name, birth date, and social security number. 22 years before investigators confirmed that the caller was actually Carl Avinger, and that the defendant was not, nor was he, Carl E. Avinger. John Stamp, Bobby Jackson, Craig Taylor, Greg Taylor, Anthony S. Williams, Kevin C. Winley, Kevin Windley, Corey Blake, Duncan Marco Ferrari, Marco Farrar, Elvis Taylor, or Elvis Teller, names he had used to commit dozens of crimes across the city on Long Island and as far away as Oklahoma over the last 3 decades, according to court, jail, and prison records and internal police department documents obtained by the New York Times. In the months that followed, the Queens District Attorney and her prosecutors from the Housing Bureau unearthed more information about the man whose roughly half-century life had been defined by deceit. But there was one fact they had yet to discover: his name. New York restaurants open on Thanksgiving. The New York Times Republican who decried the January 6, 2021 insurrection. How the Cheney presidential power push paved the way for Trump to go further. The New York Times Republican who decried the January 6, 2021 insurrection. In the Trump era, the Shin brand of conservatism became obsolete. The New York Times TV fashion in the Kim Kardashian new legal drama All Is Fair. The power suits do the heavy lifting. The New York Times TV in Death by Lightning. Matthew McFadden and Michael Shannon make sparks fly. The New York Times RAWSEP View Wikipedia Death By Lightning is an American historical drama miniseries created by Mike Makovsky and based on the 2011 book Destiny of the Republic by Candace Millard. The series premiered on November 6, 2025 on Netflix. The show depicts the presidency of James A. Garfield leading up to his shooting by Charles J. Guteau, who had been an admirer of his, and his ultimate death. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. Aviation FAA warns of air traffic cuts Friday. If government shutdown continues, the New York Times. Trump to be gifted by sports organization soccer FIFA will award its own Peace Prize next month in Washington. The New York Times. Trump lawsuits for personal reasons fallout. Florida man threatened James Comey and Letitia James. Complaint says the New York Times. Trump lawsuits for personal reasons. Judge berates Justice Department in its prosecution of Comey. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. 5 key takeaways from the Supreme Court tariff argument. The New York Times. Trump tariffs opinion. Why it will be hard for 5 justices to bless the Trump tariffs. The New York Times. Trump tariffs opinion. Why the Trump tariff Supreme Court case could be fun listening. The New York Times. Utilities opinion. How to fix the soaring electricity prices in America. The New York Times. Mexico. Mexican president presses charges against man who groped her on the street. The New York Times. Venezuela. How the Venezuela military might respond to U.S. attacks. The New York Times. Australia. Nature seeking the elusive southern lights in Tasmania. The New York Times. Ireland. Irish police got a call about a lion. It was actually a dog named Mouse. The New York Times. France. Crime. RAWSEP View. The heartlessness of novel readers. From the article headline, cannot get enough of the Louvre heist? Try these fantasy books. The New York Times. France. Crime moves to block the Shine website over a sex doll scandal. The New York Times. Germany. How trade tensions sent automakers scrambling for chips. The New York Times. Ukraine music to Mourn Ukraine in World War II returns with fresh urgency. The New York Times. Turkey. RAWSEP View. The dictator apparently cannot be unseated. From the article headline, opinion, the indispensable Erdogan. The New York Times. Nigeria. U.S. military draws up Nigeria plans with limited options to quell violence. The New York Times. Sudan versus Trump administration ends deportation protections for South Sudanese. The New York Times. China. In China, victims of abuse are told to keep it in the family. The New York Times. Laos. Nature attacked by swarm of wasps. American father and son die in Laos. The New York Times. South Korea. Boiler tower at power plant in South Korea collapses. The New York Times. Headlines. The Guardian. November 6, 2025 U.S. elections. November 4th. 2025 pressure on Republicans after California map vote gives Democrats critical win. U.S. politics. The Guardian. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025 Trump goes on posting frenzy a day after Democrats win key elections. Trump. The Guardian. U.S. elections. November 4th, 2025 Ugandans view the Mamdani NYC win as a beacon of hope amid Democratic struggles. Mamdani. The Guardian. California Democrat Nancy Pelosi a force on Capitol Hill. 4 decades to retire from Congress. House of Representatives. The Guardian. Human interest. I seem to put out a strong new best friend vibe. Then I back off. Should I dial it down? Friendship. The Guardian. Human interest. You be the judge. Should my best friend stop calling me by a nickname? Life and Style. The Guardian. TV. Is the Kim Kardashian legal drama All Is Fair really the worst TV show of all time? U.S. television. The Guardian. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. The food stamp fight signals an era of unprecedented cruelty in America. Katrina Vanden Heuvel. The Guardian. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. Aviation. U.S. will publish list of 40 airports where air traffic will be reduced. Air transport. The Guardian. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. Workers decry Trump officials as out of control as longest shutdown drags on U.S. federal government shutdown. 2025. The Guardian. Trump tariffs. RAWSEP View. The Trump redefinition of Trump tariffs is to not frame them as a way to raise revenue for tax breaks for the rich, but reframe them as a way to bring back manufacturing to the U.S. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents. Against would smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian. November 5th, 2025 The Trump Supreme Court strategy is to redefine tariffs. Will the justices buy it? Trump tariffs. The Guardian. The stakes could not be higher. Literally life or death for the U.S., at least according to Trump. The Trump signature globe-rattling economic policy, his sweeping tariffs regime, was in the dock. Specifically, the legal mechanism his administration has used to enforce it, and the man dispatched to defend the White House put forward a somewhat puzzling argument. These are regulatory tariffs. D. John Sauer, U.S. Solicitor General, assured the court they are not revenue raising tariffs. The fact that they raise revenue is only incidental. It was a curious and more than a little confusing explanation. Tariffs on goods from overseas might raise revenue, but are not revenue-raising, designed to counter rulings by lower courts that set the stage for this test. Before the highest court in the land, a federal appeals court in Washington, D.C. ruled in August that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, a 1977 law Trump invoked to impose many of his tariffs, did not grant the power to tax to the president. Congress is granted sole authority under the Constitution to levy taxes. Trump bypassed Congress lawfully, as aides insist, to drive through a policy estimated to equate to the largest tax hike since 1993. Thus, on Wednesday morning, the administration appeared to argue before the Supreme Court that these tariffs, taxes paid by myriad U.S. companies on imported products, were not real taxes at all. Critics are not having it. Anybody can look up in the dictionary. Maria Cantwell, Democratic senator from Washington, told The Guardian tariffs are an import tax, plain and simple. I would assume the administration understands that. I actually am surprised that it was so lacking. Cantwell added of the Trump case, the court did not appear persuaded. Either you want to say tariffs are not taxes, said the liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor, but that is exactly what they are. Brazil COP30 missing 1.5C climate target is a moral failure. Guterres tells COP30 summit. COP30. The Guardian. Brazil COP30 scientists criticize straw man arguments in Bill Gates' climate memo. Climate crisis. The Guardian. Brazil COP30 triple whammy of hottest ever years risks irreversible damage, says UN. Climate crisis. The Guardian. Mexico. Mexican women outraged by public sexual assault on their president. Mexico. The Guardian. Venezuela. U.S. military buildup off Venezuela coast stirs echoes of 1989 Panama invasion. Venezuela. The Guardian. Bulgaria. Russian refinery seized. Ukraine war briefing. Bulgaria moves to seize Russian refinery, while Poland seeks to be U.S. gas conduit. Ukraine. The Guardian headlines. The Guardian November 5th, 2025 U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Democrats celebrate while Republicans stew over the Mamdani. Historic win, and others. Zoran Mamdani. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Democrats set historic records on election night. Here are 6 of the first they accomplished. Democrats. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. The full transcript of Zoran, the Mamdani victory speech, after being elected NYC Mayor Zoran Mamdani. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. The Guardian view on Zoran, the Mamdani victory. In New York, the Democrats can build on an uplifting night. Editorial. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Prop 50 Californians pass redistricting measure that helps Democrats flip up to 5 House seats. California. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Trump allies erupt over Mamdani win. On your marks, get set. Zoran Mamdani. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Trump disparages Zoran, the Mamdani victory after Democrats sweep key 2025 elections. Live U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Trump voters for Mamdani and a new left coalition. The biggest surprises from the New York election. New York. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. What does the Prop 50 passage mean for California? Gavin Newsom and the U.S. California. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Zoran Mamdani announces all-female transition team as he prepares for New York mayoralty. Zoran Mamdani. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. The Zoran Mamdani method can work beyond New York. Take the fight to the right at Diffie Chakraborty. The Guardian U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Zoran Mamdani refused to compromise on his values and was rewarded for it. Mustafa Bayami. The Guardian. California. Colbert on Pelosi calling Trump a vile creature. You know who agrees. Most Americans. Late night TV roundup. The Guardian. California. Trump budget cuts to pay for tax breaks for the rich. Jimmy Kimmel opens big beautiful food bank as SNAP cuts hit families amid shutdown. Jimmy Kimmel. The Guardian. Internet slang vibe coding beats clanker to be the Collins Dictionary word of the year. Technology. The Guardian. Kentucky. Aviation engine fell off UPS cargo plane before deadly crash near Kentucky Airport. Kentucky. The Guardian. Minnesota U.S. elections, November 4th, 2025. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey fends off progressive challengers to win third-term. Minneapolis. The Guardian. TV director of Kim Kardashian show all is fair response to scathing reviews. Hopefully opinions will change U.S. television. The Guardian. Trump ballroom and beyond. The Trump gold sign outside Oval Office prompts backlash. Trump. The Guardian. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. U.S. to cut airline traffic by 10 due to shutdown. Trump transport chief says Trump administration. The Guardian. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. Why the anger with singer and philanthropist Billie Eilish? Because it is against the rules to say what we all know about billionaire Zoe Williams. The Guardian. Trump tariffs. U.S. Supreme Court justices express skepticism over legality of Trump tariffs. Trump tariffs. The Guardian. Mexico. Women man gropes Mexican president as she speaks to citizens on the streets. Claudia Sheinbaum. The Guardian. United Kingdom economic policy is one thing Nigel Farage cannot crib from the Trump playbook. Rafael Berde. Guardian. November 5th, 2025. Nigel Farage outlines the Reform UK economic priorities at a press conference in the City of London. November 3rd, 2025. United Kingdom. RAWSEP View AI overview. The term RBA in the United Kingdom in a business context can refer to the Responsible Business Alliance. RBA. This is a global non-profit coalition dedicated to promoting responsible business conduct in global supply chains, particularly the electronics industry, and companies in the UK may undergo RBA audits to certify compliance with its code of conduct or risk-based approach. RBA in finance and auditing. RBA is a methodological framework advocated by bodies like the Financial Conduct Authority FCA, used to prioritize and manage risks such as money laundering and terrorist financing based on their severity and likelihood. From the article headline, the RBA predicts inflation will rise faster than wages. Let us hope it is wrong. Greg Jericho. The Guardian.
Red Green Fox here. The quick red green fox jumped over the barriers to clean air. Red Green Fox here. Ready to sing to you the names of the 2025 major wood-burning biomass industry subsidy opponents. 1. Biofuel Watch. 2. Bulkley Valley Stewardship Coalition of British Columbia, Canada. 3. Comite Schoen Luft, which means Beautiful Air Committee in German. 4. Dogwood Alliance. 5. Equity Group Foundation, nicknamed EGF. 6. Environmental Paper Network, nicknamed EPN. 7. Natural Resources Defense Council, nicknamed NRDC. 8. Prakaunia Narzeks Wysokie Istot, which means Workshop for All Beings in Polish. 9. Rachel Carson Council. 10 Solutions for Our Climate, nicknamed SFOC.
Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's Corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies, which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. RAWSEP View. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut down and burn tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom. The Eco-Design Wood Stove and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP View Purple Air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.